It was a cool September morning, and Richard Rawlings stood in that courtroom with the familiar, confident look he sported on Fast and Loud still engraved on his face. It was a mask, honed over years in front of the camera, a sign of control, of a transaction always about to be closed. But when the judge's voice thundered through the quiet chamber, reading the last words of the punishment, the facade crumbled. His knees went weak with a gulp. The guy who established a worldwide empire flipping Mustangs and showing off million-dollar deals on TV went down on the spot, hands gripping the wooden rail, while the brutal clicking of cameras cut through the air. The truth, finally unveiled, was horrible enough to quiet a packed courtroom, and the so-called King of Cars had built his empire on a much darker foundation than anyone could have ever guessed. Security officials moved in as spectators stared in startled silence. Richard Rawlings, swagger vanished, was dragged away with his eyes on the floor. This was the day America's most trusted car guy became its most wanted. The fall from hero to handcuffs was quick and harsh, but the story of how it happened was a steady burn of ambition, duplicity, and a secret empire in plain sight. Auto King. The sun was already scorching down on Dallas when Richard Rawlings first strolled into an old, neglected garage on a quiet street, his eyes scanning the dusty car frames and damaged windshields, not as garbage, but as unmined wealth. This was the birth of Gas Monkey Garage, the place that would be the epicenter of a television phenomenon. If you ever saw Fast and Loud, you'd recall Rawlings perched over engines with a casual confidence, yelling into his phone on negotiations, his crew of technicians scrambling to achieve unrealistic schedules. This was the American dream remade for television. Shot in high definition and scored with pounding rock and roll music. Richard was born in 1969 and was flipping automobiles even before any camera team started filming his hustle. He would sometimes brag about selling thousands of them, a level of business that sustained a large business empire that included a bar, a restaurant, and finally, a live music venue. His brand was motor oil, Texas barbecue, and shameless capitalism, all rolled into one. Fast and Loud hit the airwaves in 2012, and for 8 years, it captured an audience ready for change. Viewers tuned in religiously to see rust buckets revived into six-figure auction pieces, with Richard sealing each victory with a strong handshake, a lit cigar, and the scream of an engine as he roared out in something loud enough to wake the entire block. Fast and Loud was at one time a flagship show for the Discovery Channel, with millions of viewers tuning in for each episode. It made Richard Rawlings a household name, even among those who understood nothing about cars but were hooked on the exhilarating thrill of a win. Richard played his part to the hilt. He always wore bright clothes, rolled into meetings in a classic Mustang, and called himself the King of Cars, with a smirk that said he knew he could get away with anything. And he did so for a long time. Gas Monkey Garage increased its physical footprint and brand presence. Richard's Instagram account was a selected collection of fancy jets, admiring crowds at car events, and celebrity handshakes. The Gas Monkey brand grew into many businesses, selling anything from souvenirs to distinctive craft beer. He made big deals with automotive titans like Dodge, became a fixture at the elite SEMA show, and established his place as the face of the modern American car-flipping racket. He created an aspirational brand that sent a simple, strong message. If you work hard and move swiftly, This life is available to you too. Richard made the grimy world of auto restoration and beer drinking look impossibly glamorous, even as his crew worked through punishing, round-the-clock hours behind the scenes, racing against false deadlines that the show's editors neatly left on the cutting room floor. But the man on the TV was a carefully crafted persona. There were high fives and last-minute deals and celebratory store parties. But those were but a fraction of a far more complex story. The truth behind the TV personality was much less glamorous. When Fast and Loud wrapped in 2020, Richard's empire started to hit some real turbulence. The Gas Monkey Bar and Grill shuttered. The enthusiasm around the brand began to evaporate, and fans saw Richard transfer his focus from the garage to other endeavors that often failed to take off. He started a YouTube channel to try to keep the brand going and continued to work on automobile projects, but they didn't have the high-stakes drama that the TV show had so masterfully created. Richard was still there, still flipping cars and talking big, but the raucous din of Fast and Loud was absent. The protective aura that had formerly deflected criticism and scrutiny was gone. People began asking pointed questions. How much of the show was real? How did those amazing deals actually happen? Were the cars, manufactured under camera deadlines, mechanically sound as they looked under the flattering studio lights? Online forums began to feature stories about unpaid invoices and cutthroat business practices. The first hairline fissures started to form in the impregnable image of Richard Rawlings, the unstoppable king of cars. That increased wariness paved the way for the myth that would later blow up all over late-night TikToks and YouTube shorts, that Richard had been punished for a Mustang scandal. It was a narrative that hadn't happened yet, but it seemed believable, since the boundary between his confident TV character and the rising issues behind the brand had grown dangerously blurred. Richard Rawlings sold the promise of transforming rust into gold. The reality, however, is that the car business is a world of brutal numbers, tax burdens, and legal complications that rarely make for exciting television. Thus, the public image of the man as America's most trusted car guy was about to run headlong into a darker truth. And it began with something as ordinary as a tax audit. The unraveling. It was something as easy as a tax audit that started to spread the flaws in this immaculate facade. One spring day in 2023, an IRS agent sitting in a quiet office pulled out a big file folder, Richard Rawlings' name printed on the tab. It was another typical look at a high-profile entrepreneur's convoluted finances. Rawlings was the face everyone knew from Fast and Loud, and had built a public persona of constant success, of massive flips, and even bigger parties, with crowds chanting the Gas Monkey name. But the statistics on the paper didn't quite add up to the life displayed on the screen. An expense line for restoration items looked a little too tidy, and the paperwork for a recent custom Mustang sale had an inconsistency in the vehicle identification number, VIN. At first, it had looked a mere clerical error, a typo maybe, one letter wrong, one number out of place. But the record came up when the investigators searched the VIN through federal databases. The system said it didn't exist. It was not merely a number missing on a form. It was a VIN of an automobile that, according to official records, did not exist. This ghost automobile had been a celebrity. It was described as an unusual build of a Mustang, painted a bright metallic blue. It has been driven to auto exhibitions, where enthusiastic audiences came to take photos and posted throughout social media with captions praising another six-figure flip. Fans recalled seeing Richard personally behind the wheel, revving the strong engine and smiling for the camera, proclaiming that this was the automobile that would break auction records. But behind the scenes, another tale was happening. The IRS discreetly partnered with the Department of Transportation and numerous state car bureaus to methodically cross-reference Richard's transactions. The deeper they dug, the more contradictions they uncovered. The sales records did not match claims for restoration. The cars were supposed to need emissions tests and registration costs, but did not have those important documents. He claimed parts as business deductions, but didn't have the invoices to connect them to the precise builds showcased on his channels. In a moment of tremendous irony, evidence came from Rawlings' own media machine. One of his YouTube uploads, a casual shop tour, including a clip of the blue Mustang sitting under bright studio lights, polished to a mirror shine. The camera moved to show a table full of engine parts, and Richard in the background was laughing with his workers, shouting out the next project. But investigators paused the video and zoomed in, and could clearly see the VIN plate through the windshield. There was no restoration paperwork on record with the state of Texas to match it. What they found next would blow the inquiry apart. A closer look at the automobile's history showed that the car had been built from a salvage shell, but the documentation had been done under an entirely different title. The move allowed it to dodge the heavy costs and intense inspections that a genuine build of such value would have encountered. It was this Mustang, once a shining star of Richard's social media empire, that was the one thread that, when tugged, began to unravel it all. The IRS quietly opened a full-blown federal inquiry into alleged tax fraud. The scope was broadened to include business deductions claimed by Gas Monkey Holdings, income from merchandise sales related to the show, and income from international appearances that may have been misreported. There were further issues about whether customs and export declarations had been properly submitted, since a convoluted money trail including offshore auctions and individual collectors who had bought refurbished cars was raised. Rawlings had been bragging to the press for years about turning over hundreds of automobiles a year, but the audit found gaping holes in the paperwork the federal legislation is supposed to demand. Behind the scenes, a team of committed investigators started the tedious work of piecing together every sale, every title transfer, and every social media post showing a car with an identifiable license plate or VIN tag. They searched through hours of YouTube footage and old Fast and Loud episodes, and even Instagram reels, matching timestamps with invoices sent by Richard's enterprises to the IRS. A regular audit of tax returns had snowballed into a sweeping federal probe. Agents were deployed to auctions, questioned former buyers, and subpoenaed records Richard probably assumed would never see the light of day. The man who had made his name turning rust into gold now had a bleak new reality where every minute detail mattered, and every missing receipt could be a criminal accusation. the king of cars, the charming dude fans trusted to come up with awesome builds while cracking jokes and burning cigars, was now fully under the watch of the federal authorities. The Mustang with the faked VIN was more than a car. It was the emblem of a system that was beginning to crumble from within. But beyond the closed doors of Gas Monkey Garage was something even Rawlings' closest friends never could have guessed. The hidden empire. The investigators weren't after what was in the shiny videos online, but in a place that Gas Monkey staff had once called in cryptic fashion, the cage. To most visitors and even many employees, it seemed to be little more than another parts storage area tucked away in the back of the sprawling Dallas warehouse. It was full of ancient body panels and crates of carburetors and dusty boxes with hand-lettered tags faded by the sun. But behind a well-disguised false wall, detectives uncovered what they would subsequently characterize in official reports as a modest, industrial-scale counterfeit lab. That audit, which had begun with a single bogus VIN, had brought federal officials to this clandestine room on a steamy Texas morning, armed with a warrant. They passed rows of dusty rims and stepped over crumbling floor tiles till they reached a heavy, reinforced metal door. The air inside was heavy with the smell of chemicals and metal. They uncovered state-of-the-art laser etching equipment, rows of blank VIN plates, and advanced printers that could manufacture counterfeit registration stickers so convincing they could fool any but the most thorough scrutiny. The center of the business was a scuffed metal workbench with files of original VIN info painstakingly retrieved from salvage yard purchases, and detailed ledgers indicating which new identities will be awarded to which builds. This was not just car restoration. This was an organized operation of identity theft on wheels. Within the cage, cars with checkered histories, flood-damaged shells, stolen frames, or cars with structural issues that could not be repaired were reincarnated. They were recast as numbers-matching pristine classics with new identities, ready for the auction table. The pieces could be passed off as rare, historically significant findings, complete with fake documentation that unknowing customers trusted without question. Especially when supported by the Gas Monkey moniker. The operation was disturbingly smart. Federal officials later watched some VINs travel through 3 or 4 states, a process known as title washing, before being returned to Texas with a new, immaculate identity, ready for a high-profile public sale. What made the finding even more damning was the subsequent witness testimony from former employees. They'd been quiet for years, out of fear or some misguided idea that what happened in the cage was just shop business. One former technician remembered being told to just grind off the old and let the new plates do the talking, assuming it was a standard, if unorthodox, part of the restoration process. Another employee said he saw substantial cash payments being made after hours when private collectors would come to pick up some builds. No paperwork was ever submitted. Looking back, Richard Rawlings' own YouTube broadcasts had inadvertently captured flashes of this hidden operation. In one footage, Richard was showing viewers around a late-night work session. The bright camera lights flashed on the corner of the closed cage door for a second, as he joked about secret projects we can't show you guys yet. His audience at the time felt it was a smart tease for a new, exclusive build. But investigators, who had also viewed the tape, spotted the strengthened hinges and keypad access mechanism, both of which had been shown in the shop photos given by whistleblowers. The deception was on a massive scale. Later reports suggested that as many as 50 cars had gone through this scheme in a 2-year period, with illegal income in the millions. The cars restored on camera for the TV show generally had valid papers, but the off-camera jobs often ran through this underground system. This dual process allowed the enterprise to function out in the open, fueling the brand's voracious need for unique builds and large sales, with a covert cash source that was never taxed, never reported, and never questioned by customers who trusted the Gas Monkey moniker. That's what drew the federal prosecutors. It's what led Richard Rawlings, the king of cars, to be the focus of a criminal investigation that went far beyond a single Mustang with a false VIN. The reputation he'd established on quick deals and showy builds was starting to buckle under the weight of the evidence taken from that little secret room, where the myth of Gas Monkey collided with the cold, hard truth of federal law. But the strategy finally fell apart with one tragic betrayal, when someone on the inside of the operation turned on Rawlings and gave detectives the final piece of evidence they needed to close in. The final betrayal. It all started when a wealthy European collector, a guy who'd spent years looking for a legit Shelby GT 500, thought he'd finally discovered the car of his dreams at Gas Monkey Garage. Richard Rawlings himself showed him around the showroom, gently stroking the shining silver paint and the beautifully polished engine bay. He wove yarns about classic American roads and the proud, storied background of the automobile. It was a deal, the type of transaction that is sealed with an Instagram celebration photo. The collector, fully convinced, sent $1.2 million for what he believed to be an authentic piece of automobile history. But what he'd bought was a ghost. The VIN was fake, the paperwork were fake, and the car's real history was concealed under layers of polished metal and clever marketing. Immediately upon his attempting to register the vehicle, customs officers in the collector's native country recognized the documents as false. That finding prompted a diplomatic phone call that jumped the Atlantic and landed squarely in the lap of U.S. federal officials. It was the foreign client in that time who became a major whistleblower. He surrendered a mountain of evidence: emails, receipts for wire transfers, taped voice messages that showed how trust had been turned into a weapon in Rawlings' world, transforming eager clients into unwitting victims. When trust is weaponized, nobody is secure. This last defection gave prosecutors the last piece of the puzzle they needed to open every door that had been closed around Richard Rawlings and his covert organization. But the question still remained: how did he get away with it so long? The answer was right there, out in the open, beamed into millions of homes each week. Fast and Loud wasn't simply a TV show. It was the marketing engine. Each episode was a lesson in storytelling: the exciting hunt for rare muscle vehicles, the contrived suspense of the last-minute deadline, and the triumphal unveiling of roaring engines beneath the dramatic glow of the shop lights. Everything seemed so real, and that was the idea. One episode might see Rawlings wax poetic over a newly repaired Mustang, as if the camera was his confessional, waxing poetic about its authenticity and pedigree. Meanwhile, for those very frames, the VINs weren't always what they seemed, and the paperwork recounted stories that never had transpired on the road. Every episode was a sales presentation. Every dramatic barn find was a sales funnel. Fans who believed in the charismatic persona that Rawlings exhibited on TV were unwittingly entering into a meticulously constructed illusion, a world in which the boundaries between television drama and real-life fraudulent transactions had entirely dissolved. Every episode was a piece of proof. Every find could be manufactured, and the show itself became a shield, allowing Rawlings to build a deep pool of trust with an audience that wanted to believe. The ratings were rising, as was the demand for the cars he flipped on Gas Monkey Garage, providing him with the perfect cover to conduct the transactions that would eventually lead to his downfall. As soon as the truth got out, the empire was almost instantly dissolved. The waning, with the music of roaring engines and the drama of tight deadlines under blazing Texas shoplights, Richard Rawlings' Gas Monkey Garage had been a force in the culture of the automobile industry for more than a decade. It had attracted millions of spectators. Nevertheless, the empire that he had labored for years to build was ruthlessly destroyed within 72 hours of its construction. All of this began with a post on a forum dedicated to old automobiles. There were receipts from a Shelby GT500 that were posted by a collector, and they did not fit the stated history of the car. On this episode of Fast and Loud, the VIN tags, the repair timelines, and even the paperwork that Richard had proudly displayed in front of the camera in previous episodes were now being scrutinized in a manner that was intense and based on crowdsourced information. In the afternoon of that day, the boards had been transformed into digital archives that contained auction images and timestamps for episodes. A number of viewers went back and viewed earlier segments, pausing the video at certain points in order to compare the chassis stamps and documentation with public documents that revealed a totally different narrative. Insiders in the industry who had previously pleaded with Gas Monkey to cooperate were gradually withdrawing from engagement in negotiations. Auction houses of a significant size have placed bids on all autos that have any known connection to the garage. Within 24 hours, Discovery, who was once Rawlings' most ardent supporter, withdrew Gas Monkey banners from its streaming pages. Following this, the company released a brief statement in which it distanced itself from Richard's activities and stated that it was reviewing its content strategy. The sponsors, who had readily matched their brands with Richard's boisterous Texas-style personality, started removing their logos from their websites and deleting old social media posts that they had shared with him. Almost immediately, the market for old automobiles was hit with a devastating force. The prices of automobiles that originated from Gas Monkey were almost completely eliminated overnight. The community was in a state of panic, and collectors began frantically calling each other to inquire as to whether or not they had reviewed their paperwork and studied the hidden welds and stamps that were on their frames. Some people found out that there were hidden figures that didn't add up, and they became increasingly terrified as they realized that their most treasured investments were in danger of being worthless. Others were surprised to see liens attached to automobiles that they had believed to be theirs in full. Collectors rushed to either sell their vehicles or desperately check the legality of their vehicles, which caused the market to go into a state of crisis. 72 hours later, the weight of receipts and frozen frames of film brought down years of empire building that had been going on for years. Not only had the empire of Gas Monkey Garage been built on high-octane edits and smoky burnouts, but it had also been built on a foundation that was cracking under the pressure of the most straightforward truth. People were finally asking the right questions. It was as if the entire classic car world had woken up from a long dream, rubbed the Instagram filters out of their eyes, and realized that the empire had been built on this foundation. And what is the most heartbreaking event that has happened to Richard? Every single frame of Fast and Loud that had historically been utilized in the construction of his reputation was now being utilized in the process of dismantling it. Following the conclusion of the investigation, it became clear that the case of Richard Rawlings was more than just a story about a man's collapse. It was a cautionary tale about how easily loud confidence can masquerade as honesty. And it was a reflection of an entire business that was founded on bright chrome and buried weaknesses. One of the most unpleasant lessons that I learned was that trust, once acquired for the purpose of celebrity, can never be acquired again. And for many years to come, the automotive industry will be forced to deal with the repercussions of that treachery. Do you know of any more television personalities that might be keeping their own dark secrets hidden?